the OSU Extension Educator in Madison County, and I will be hosting you today as we talk through some of the commodity program details and the key economic considerations for 2021 program year. So of course, today what we're focused on is ARC PLC with that March 15th deadline for ARC PLC. So just remember that even if you, what we're going to be talking about today is your program choices. You do have the option this year for 2021 to change the programs that you elected in 2019 and 2020. So you can change which crops you have in ARC or PLC or ARC IC or ARC County, and Ben's going to walk us through that in just a little bit. But even if you don't want to make any changes, you do need to enroll, which means you need to go into your FSA office and actually sign the contract if you want to be eligible for payments. If you do not enroll for 2021 crop year, you're not eligible to receive any payments. So you want to make sure that you've enrolled. Some of you might have done that when you went in for CFAP payments or some other reason that you may have gone into FSA office recently. You may already be enrolled. About 70% of the farms in Ohio have enrolled at this point. So if you haven't enrolled, you definitely want to enroll, and you also have the option to make changes to your program elections. When you've enrolled, if you don't make any changes to your program elections, you're just going to default automatically with no penalty back to the programs that you selected for 2019 and 2020. But you definitely want to make sure that you've actually enrolled so that you're eligible for any payments. So with that, I'll get right into our presentation. Today on our webinar, we have a few people here as resource people. Chris Zoller is the Ag and Natural Resources Educator in Tuscarawas County, and he and I will be kind of monitoring the chat and the Q&A and making sure that we're answering your questions if we can along the way. And if we can't answer them easily, as Ben's presenting, we'll field those to Ben and Matt Kleske at the end when we have time for some Q&A discussion. We have Matt Kleske here from Ohio Farm Service Agency. He's our key agricultural program specialist for Ohio FSA, and he'll be helping with the Q&A. He's a great resource and very knowledgeable and very helpful person to have on the webinar this morning. And we have Ben Brown, who serves as a Senior Research Associate and Agribusiness and Policy Extension Specialist at the University of Missouri. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ben. Thank you for being here this morning with us, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody. And hopefully you can see my PowerPoint screen all right. I'm working with one monitor today instead of my normal multiple. And so, but I appreciate the opportunity to be back with the great folks in the state of Ohio. Certainly Ohio holds a dear spot in my heart, and really appreciate the opportunity to be back with you. So we're going to talk about understanding and thinking through farm policy decisions in 2021. So we're going to talk a little bit about how crop insurance ties into the commodity program decisions as well. And even though ARC and PLC are enrolled and administered through the Farm Service Agency, some of the crop insurance programs that also tie into those decisions are administered through the Risk Management Agency. And so they're administered separately, but they do have overlapping features. So we're going to touch on that a little bit today. Certainly, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll address those and talk to those. I'm more than happy to walk through scenarios or talk with anybody about specific things related to their farm. And that's probably a key point I want to make today is, I'm going to give some overview of where I see the programs heading in 2021. And, certainly I think most operations will fit into these categories, but there's, as we've learned, there's always, when you've got 70,000 plus farms across the state of Ohio, usually you have some anomalies that fit into this as well. So if you've got something that you want to talk through or you think's unique, please let us know. We're willing to talk through that with you as well. So let me first just start off and say, we do have a Farm Bill election coming up. As Mary mentioned, March 15th is the date. And that should be easy for most people to remember because March 15th has traditionally served as our crop insurance deadline as well. And so, we did just do this a year ago. Many of you probably remember the process, especially if you were in Northwest Ohio. We spent a lot of time talking about ARC and PLC decisions a year ago because we had prevented plant acres in 2019 that added some complexity to the decision. That decision was for a 2-year period, but it only covered program years 2019 and 2020. And so the easy way to think about program years is they match the summer cropping cycle for corn and soybeans. So we're electing for the 2021 program year now by March 15th, and that'll represent the crop that is grown this summer. So this is the first time in a long, long time that we are starting the Farm Bill process on time. And that's not I don't say that in any way in offense to FSA. FSA does a phenomenal job. And if you get a chance, you should thank your county folks for the amazing work they've done for you over years, but especially in the last couple of years with a lot of new programs and changes. But it takes a while to get these programs up and running with software and training and everything. And Congress hasn't passed bills on time the last few cycles. And so we haven't had on-time enrollment. And again, that's not FSA's fault, but we're actually starting the cycle on time. And what that'll mean is that we know about as little information about yields and prices as we've ever known at this point, at least all the way back to the 1980s. So it could be a little bit frustrating, but I do want to remind folks that you have the option now to amend your decision. So it used to be that we signed up for 5 years at a time. Now we can go in every year and amend that decision starting this year if we want to. You do not have to amend your decision. If you want to keep what you have, you're welcome to keep what you have. But as Mary mentioned, you must sign the paper. You must go in and actually enroll for the program. So if you haven't enrolled for 2021 yet, you need to get into the office and do that before March 15th. The only folks that wouldn't have to do that are those that are in multi-year enrollment. But if you change your election, that kicks you out and you have to re-enroll anyways. So if you're unsure if you've enrolled or elected, but especially the enrolled part, make sure you call into your FSA office and just ask them if you've signed the form for 2021. And this is kind of the point I have there is producers do not have to do have to enroll annually and basically sign the piece of paper. Some have already done that. Many of you have probably done it with your CFAP payments earlier this year as well. And so again, if you're uncertain, just maybe make sure and double check. And again, you do not have to amend your decision, but you do have to enroll every year. And then what about landowners? Well, so a year ago, there was a pretty substantial role for landowners to participate in this process. We had a PLC yield update, and that required landowner participation. This time, and only the people that have shared interest in the farm are the ones that need to enroll. And so, if you're cash renting something from a landlord, that is your decision. Or if you have power of attorney for your landlord, if you're on a share rent agreement. You still, it would be good practice to at least consult with them, but certainly, there's a lower risk. So if any of you are landowners on the call today, some of this is not going to apply to you unless you're just wanting to be updated on what's happening for your farm. And then just like, most years, we do not have a base acre update this go around either. So if you did not have base on a farm before, you still do not have base now. And for some folks, what you plant might be out of whack with what your historical base acres are. And we don't have the opportunity to update that this time around either. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of what this process this year is going to look like. And we're going to go through kind of some key considerations related to the 2021 program year. Probably the big thing that I said that I'll just reiterate is we are signing up on time this go around, which is good. This is how the programs are supposed to work, but it also means we know about as little information as we've ever known at this time of the year. So here we are today, and this is just my crude timeline. This represents 2 calendar years. So 2021 all the way through 2022. So the orange star represents where we are today, trying to make the decision here the middle of February. Again, the enrollment deadline is March 15th. So that's quickly approaching in the grand scheme of the program year. But when we look at the key dates, all the rest of the things on the screen are key dates for the remainder of this program year. The biggest two that stand out to me is the crop that this is going to be based on is the crop that we haven't even planted yet, at least for corn and soybeans. For wheat, that's the crop that's in the ground right now. But for corn and soybeans, it'll be the crop that's growing this summer. We're a long ways from knowing what yields are going to be this summer. But we're still about 8 months or 6 months, 6 months from starting this marketing year. So this marketing year runs all the way from September 1st of 2021 to August 31st of 2022. And then if this program year triggers any payments, those will be paid out in October of 2022. So as you all know very well, I don't have to tell agriculturalists, there's a lot of things that can change in the futures market or the cash market between now and 6 months from now and 18 months from now. So we've got a lot of things that'll pop up and determine the viability of this program crop. So we're going to talk through a couple of things. First thing, the suite of programs that we have to choose from is the same as what we've had the last couple of sign-up periods. So we don't really have to spend a lot of time talking about the new programs, but I am just going to do a quick overview to make sure everybody's on the same page. We have the two revenue coverage programs, which are the agricultural risk coverage options represented there in kind of the light red colors. There's both a county option that's based on county yields, and then an individual option, which is based on individual yields. So we have both of those, and then we have the price loss coverage, which is strictly just triggered on a national price, and we'll talk about that more here in a few seconds. So those are our commodity programs that we have available to us. This decision is made on an FSA farm by farm level, meaning that if you have multiple FSA farm numbers, you can choose different programs depending on what you feel that farm is best suited for. The interesting one is when you get into the agriculture risk coverage and the price loss coverage, or excuse me, the county option of ARC and then the price loss coverage. Those are paid out on 85% of your base acres. If you're interested in the agricultural risk coverage, which is based on individual yields, you're only paid out on 65% of your base acres. And while that might not seem like that big of a deal, what we found is that is pretty burdensome. That 20 acres, if you've got 100 acres on your farm, you're losing 20 acres of payments. That becomes pretty burdensome in most cases when you're not dealing with large prevent plant acres like what we saw in 2019. So again, our agricultural risk coverage has its place, but I think the payment limitation on base acres will limit that attractiveness to producers. You can make the decision by the crop, so you can put corn in ARC County, and you can put soybeans in ARC County, and you can put wheat in PLC if you want, and you can do that for those two programs. If you elect ARC individual, so the total farm package, all the commodities on that farm number have to go in ARC individual. You cannot separate PLC wheat, for instance, or wheat out into PLC. All the commodities on that farm have to go into ARC individual. And we'll talk about the supplemental coverage option a little bit later. But again, the decision date, if you want to amend your decision, and your enrollment date, so the day you have to go and sign the piece of paper, is March 15, 2021. So I'm going to give you the goods up front. I'm not going to make you wait around, but certainly, the remainder of these slides would support this, kind of thought process, if you will. We get asked a lot about what should I do with my crop? And while certainly I think we can make some blanket statements in general about which crop needs to go in which program or is favorable for the different programs, I tell people that I certainly do believe there are situations that stand out and maybe change that statement, right? So the exceptions, the typical economist answer always is, well, it depends, right? And so this is kind of my typical answer here is, I think the answer to these 4 questions get you to an answer. And I think I can get you a straightforward answer by following this process. But I'm going to ask you, if you were to, if we were in person and you said, what should I elect for my farm? These are the 4 questions and the order I would ask these questions in. So just a disclaimer, this is my thought process for doing this. I think this is what makes the most sense. And I'll back that up in the slides to come, but certainly I think producers need to think through these decisions themselves and what it means for the risk of their operation. The first decision this go around, which was not our first decision the last farm bill cycle, is do you want to do the supplemental coverage option or the enhanced coverage option for your farm? Those are both what I call high coverage policies for crop insurance. They insure against an area-based policy, most of the times a county-based policy for revenue or yield within the county. And so you can buy anywhere from like, SCO, for instance, is 76 to 86% coverage of the county revenue or yield. ECO is a band between 86% and 90% of county revenue or yields, or 86 to 95% of county-based revenue or yield. So if you're doing that for your farm, you would say yes, and you would slide over to the side. And the next question is, do I want to buy SCO for my farm? So SCO does require that you do PLC. So if your answer is there, then PLC is your option for whatever commodity you're looking through. And again, this is corn and soybeans, because I think the economic conditions now for corn and soybeans are very similar. If the answer to either of those questions is no, the next question you have to ask yourself is, are any of my acres classified by an irrigation practice? The 2018 Farm Bill broke some counties out into irrigated acres and non-irrigated acres. So for corn, we have 4 counties in the state of Ohio, and then soybeans, I believe there's 11 counties that are broken out by irrigation practice. If the answer is yes, and you have irrigated acres, you see my thought process there at the bottom. The reason for this is irrigated acres tend to have very little variation in yield. And so therefore, taking Ark County, which is a yield triggering policy or sensitive to yields, you're probably not going to get a lot of benefit of irrigated acres in Ark County. And so that's where I think, maybe that's a case where you put those acres into PLC. If those acres aren't irrigated, Ark County. Same way if you don't have any irrigated practice at all, most cases that's you're 100% non-irrigated, and so you'd be in Ark County as well. So again, this is my thought process. I think it's pretty simple and straightforward. And I'm over the next couple of 20 minutes, I'm going to back these statements up. But certainly, if you were looking for an answer, here's what I've got for corn and soybeans. So a little bit of a program refresher related to the 2021 program year, and I've got our forecast from USDA and FAPRI here at the University of Missouri for marketing year average prices for next year. And futures prices would seem to support these marketing year average prices so far, subtracting off a certain basis. But the price loss coverage program only triggers when the marketing year average price falls below an effective reference price. And so that reference price is referenced there by the black solid line. The yellow line is in reference to the marketing year average price for corn. So you can see all the way back from 2009. I went ahead and put all the reference prices for 2021 up there in the top right. So for corn, 370 is our price that we've got to fall below to trigger a PLC payment. Soybeans, 840, wheat, 550, barley, 495, and grain sorghum, 395. So those are our reference prices. You might have heard in the last Farm Bill cycle about a price escalator, meaning if prices go high enough that those reference prices could increase to provide a safety net. That is there, but it requires multi-years of higher prices. So 1 year is not going to do it. We're going to need multiple years of high prices to increase those reference prices. So those are our prices for this year. As you can see, at least in the case for corn, and again, this is the same for everybody in PLC across the country. They're all using this national marketing year price. And so, it's the same for everybody. And as you can see for corn, the reference price or the marketing year average price fell below the reference price for a substantial portion of the last Farm Bill cycle. It did not the first year of the program, but all the rest of the years since 2015 have fallen below that reference price. Even last year, the reference price came in the marketing year price came in at 356. So that was 14 cents below our 370 reference price. You look at the expectations for marketing year prices for 2020, we're well above that 370. Same way as last year. Next year, the expectation is that reference price will be about 50 cents, or the marketing year price will be about 50 cents above the reference price. So again, this is how the program triggers. If it triggers a payment, then you're paid out on 85% of your base acres. So just keep that in mind for the program. I want to talk a little bit about how that national price is established, because this is the question I get. Basically, the way it works is the National Ag Statistics Service. They survey points of first sale. So your elevators across the country, feed mills, ethanol plants, They have all of them listed in a data set, and they take a sample size of that, or a sample of that data set, and they survey those folks, and they ask 2 questions. And the 2 questions that are asked are, how many total dollars did you pay out to farmers this month in corn, for instance, and how many bushels did you buy? Those are the only 2 questions that are asked: a total dollar amount and then the number of bushels bought. And so they take that dollar amount and divide it by the bushels, and that's how they get their monthly price for that month. And so, this is the same process that's used for many state checkoff programs. And again, I like to remind folks that the marketing year for corn and soybeans won't start until September of this year and run through August 31st of next year. For wheat, we're about halfway through this marketing year already. It started last May. So the way it works is, once they have identified that average price across the country for September, it's then multiplied by the percent of the crop for that month, or sold during that month. So as you would imagine, most of the crop, about half or 60% of corn and soybean crops, are sold in the first half of the year, because that's when we have the crop and we sell it, move it on to the grain. So we take the percentage of the crop sold during that month, and we multiply it by the price for that month, and we add them all up, and that gets us the national marketing year average price. So it is based on cash prices in North Dakota, for instance, with historically low basis, or relatively low basis compared to where we are in Ohio and even Missouri. There's several universities, and ERS, the Economic Research Service at USDA, also offers season average price forecasts. You can follow those throughout the year. Some of them do different methods, but most of them take the prices that we've seen already this year, and then usually use futures prices, an indicator of what marketing year prices are going to be for the remainder of the year, to come up with an estimate for the marketing year prices. But the reason I spent time talking about this is because here, as of late, I've probably been asked about 10 times in the last 2 weeks, let's say, how the high prices now get figured into those marketing year average prices that will start in September. And most of the questions revolve around, if farmers are doing new crop sales, meaning that they're either doing a futures contract or a forward contract now, do those get captured in the marketing year average price? And the answer is it kind of depends, based on the contract. If you think about it, farmers are selling a futures contract right now at a higher price. And then when we get ready for delivery in the fall, they're going to buy back that futures contract off the market, and then they'll sell their grain to their local elevator. They don't actually deliver their grain on their futures contract. They sell their grain to the local elevator. So the local elevator is buying grain at whatever the cash price is in, let's say, October, November, even though that farmer maybe bought a future or sold a futures contract today for $5, let's say, or something along those lines. It's not that high, but it's not at $5, but it's if they sold it today at $5, the price that'll get put into the calculation here is what the cash price was at the elevator at delivery in November. The opposite is true for a forward contract sale. So a forward contract sale is a farmer that is agreeing on a price for delivery at some point in the future. And so if today, I go into my local elevator and say, hey, I want to deliver X amount of bushels to you in November, what price would you give me? And they say, well, we'll give you $4.40 for that corn that you're going to deliver in November. Then that $4.40 is what's actually going to go into the calculation. So to answer this question, the best way I can do it is futures and futures contracts and hedge to arrive contracts would not be in the calculation for this national marketing year average price. Forward contract and basis contracts that are enacted today and delivered in the fall would impact marketing year average prices. Keep in mind, this is a relatively small portion of the farming population that does early season grain marketing, even though I think it should be more. And so I would not look at today's prices and say, okay, prices are high. Everybody's selling grain. That's not impacting that marketing year average. It could if it was forward and basis contracts, but not futures contracts. So happy to answer more questions about that if anybody has any. As far as the agriculture risk coverage program, this is just the case for Greene County, Ohio corn. The program triggers when county revenue falls below a certain guarantee, and that guarantee is based on the 5 years previous for the county of yields and prices. And what you can see here is in my graph, the black line is representing that guarantee, and the yellow bars are representing the actual revenue for the county. And so payments are triggered when the yellow bars fall below the black line. And as you can see, the first 3 years for Greene County in 2014, 15, and 16 triggered Ark County payments. The last 3 years for Ark County, corn, and Greene County, they have not triggered. And based on today's prices for next year, and then just an average yield, we're not expecting, or I'm not expecting Ark County payments for Greene County in 2020 or 2021. And sorry, the last bar there should be 2021, but I realized I left off the label. So, the period of high prices right now with average yield certainly doesn't suggest that either program is going to trigger out much across the state. And that's the reason why I think you shouldn't stress about this decision a lot, from the standpoint that the majority of folks across the country are not going to see many payments from either program. Just comparison here of Ark and PLC. If Ark County was expected to make any payments for any of the 3 years, you would have seen a gold bar in there. But like I said, for Greene County, Ohio, in 2019, it triggered a payment because, again, that marketing year average price came in at $356, which was below our $370 reference price. But we're not expecting a PLC payment this year or next year. Similarly, we're not expecting an Ark County payment this year or next year with average yields. So what could change this? Low crop yields in 2021 could spur Ark County payments, especially if we have some type of drought or extreme weather again, where precipitation, persistent and frequent precipitation hampers our yields. That would certainly support Ark County payments. Likely a drop in yields, if it was widespread enough across the country, would increase prices. So it would make PLC less likely, but it might trigger an Ark County payment because of the yield component. And so it's possible to trigger these payments, and we'll talk about that later, but at least the expectation right now is that neither program is going to pay out any or much if it does trigger. Just examples here for Greene County again. We've got all these if you want to see them, but the forecast for soybeans is for prices to be well above that 840 reference price. I believe the prices here, 2020 is $11.15 or $11.15, and then the expected prices for marketing year 2021 for soybeans is $11.25. So that's where we're currently at today. Here's the performance for Greene County, Ohio soybeans. Again, the program triggers when actual revenue falls below a guaranteed benchmark. The yellow lines there are actual revenue. The black line is the guarantee. And you can see that for Greene County, there was 2 years that triggered Ark County soybean payments. 2019 being one of those when actual yields came in 12% below the average. But at least with average yields for next year, 2021, that far column, we're not expecting program payments for Ark County. And then just here's the comparison. A very similar type of situation to corn. The difference here, and the reason I put these slides in, is if you remember on the comparison for Greene County, Ohio corn triggered a 2019 PLC payment, but no Ark County payment. The reverse was true for soybeans. Soybeans remained above the 840 reference price, so no PLC payment was triggered. But because of the yield shortfall, that 12% drop in yield, it triggered a pretty large $37 per acre soybean payment for Ark County. So again, I just want to emphasize that if you think about it, national price, which is an average of all receiving stations across the country for a year, is going to be low volatility. You're not going to see major changes in national price from year to year. And that's what we've seen is very little variation in national prices, but individual county yields can vary pretty substantially across the country, and they're very sensitive. In this case, Greene County, the reason I picked this out is because soybeans triggered a pretty large payment for Ark County, even though the corn yield did not fall enough to trigger an Ark County corn payment. So just want to keep that in mind for folks. I want to mention and talk about the irrigation, the split and irrigation practices, and certainly if you're looking at, for your county's payouts for 2019. So again, this was the payment you should have got this last October. These are Ohio, Ark County, and PLC corn payments. Ark County's on the left, PLC's on the right. If your county is red, you have both the option of irrigated and non-irrigated acres. And I'm going to show you that here in the next slide. But the majority, or the point I wanted to make here is that in 2019, if you remember back, we had all that wet weather in Northwest Ohio, but for the corn that did get planted in Northwest Ohio, it yielded pretty good. And so therefore, the corn that was in the calculation in 2019 did not trigger an Ark County payment for Northwest Ohio. But we had a pretty good drought that emerged in West Central Ohio. And you can see that, if you look at Clark and Champaign counties, which are these counties right here in the middle shaded by the purple, because of that yield sensitivity and decline in 2019, they triggered some pretty substantial Ark County payments. You look at PLC, and because everybody's getting the same payment rate, it just depends on your yield per acre. Payment rates across the state for PLC corn in 2019 averaged anywhere from 10 to about $20 or 16, 17 bucks an acre. So much more even distribution. Ark County really emphasizes that sensitivity of local yields. And I'll reiterate, emphasize that. Again, I do want to break out this irrigated, non-irrigated. If you are in the case where you have irrigated, non-irrigated acres on your farm, this probably doesn't surprise you that the non-irrigated acres are going to be the most volatile. And certainly in 2019, 2 out of the 4 corn counties did not trigger a payment, but 2 did, and 2 triggered, pretty large non-irrigated corn payments, whereas the irrigated acres didn't trigger anything. And again, this is the reason why I say I don't think you can give a blanket answer for corn without answering the question of, do you have irrigated, non-irrigated acres? The reason for this really is that, irrigation smooths out the variation in yield, right? If it gets too dry, you're going to turn on irrigation and your yields are not going to be very volatile. We had an interesting case here in Missouri where, it was too wet. And so the irrigated acres, their variation was just like the non-irrigated counties, and the fact that the excess moisture really limited yields. But because those benchmarks were higher, right, that guaranteed benchmark was higher, the irrigated acres actually paid out pretty large too. Most years, only about 1 year out of 10, I found that's going to be the case. So again, more yield variation in non-irrigated, less variation in irrigated. That should not surprise anybody, but I do think it fits into the calculation. Looking at soybeans, again, very similar story. PLC did not pay out at all and has never paid out in the history of the price loss coverage program, because the marketing year price for soybeans has never got low enough below $8.40 to trigger a payment. But you can see we had some pretty substantial Ark County soybean payments in 2019, again, based on that localized yield variation. And then here was the breakout of irrigated, non-irrigated payments. And again, more variation in irrigated, non-irrigated acres than irrigated acres. For wheat, wheat was the one case where payments were pretty similar between the 2 programs. They still, PLC did still edge out the Ark County payments, all else equal, across the state. But the program was much closer than what we expected going into the election period. And the reason for that was the low yields for wheat across the state of Ohio. Most counties had a low yield that was triggering some pretty large Ark County payments, whereas the price for wheat remained low. And we knew the price for wheat was going to remain low given the economic conditions that we were seeing. So most people did enroll in PLC wheat, and that turned out to be the right decision for at least 2019. But Ark County was competitive. And I did want to make that case that Ark County was competitive. I want to touch on Ark IC for a second. This certainly isn't a slide that's new. You've seen this one before if you've attended any of my talks. But Ark IC was a completely different type of beast. It was similar to Ark County in the manner that it is a county revenue, it is a revenue program, meaning that when yields and prices together fall below a certain benchmark, it triggers a payment. but it is based on individual yields, and it's based on all the crops grown on your farm to create those revenue benchmarks, meaning that the revenue for your soybeans and corn are combined together to create that benchmark. And then your actual revenue is a combination of your corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever you planted as well. There are three major differences between ARC County and ARC Individual. And I've already touched on some of these. The first one is that all commodities on your FSA farm number have to go into ARC Individual, whereas ARC County, you can pick different programs for different crops. And then all farms in ARC Individual in the same state are combined together and blended together. So if you've got multiple farm numbers that you want to put in ARC IC, those farms are going to go together to create one benchmark, and then you're just going to have one actual revenue too that'll be compared. ARC IC is based on planted acres for the current year. So if you plant corn in 2020 or 2021, your historic, and you only plant corn, you don't plant soybeans or wheat, your historical benchmark is only going to be based on your corn revenue in the past years as well. So if you have 100 acres in an FSA farm, and every year those 100 acres are all planted to the same crop, but one year it's corn, the next year it's soybeans, the next year it's corn, the next year soybeans. If we're in a year where it's just corn, we're not going to care about your historical soybean revenue. It gets thrown out. So it is something to be aware of, and I'll talk about that here in a second. I do think there are some areas or some situations where ARC IC makes sense. The first one is 100% prevent plant on any of your FSA farms. And we know this very well from 2019, where large portions of Missouri and Northwest Ohio were 100% prevent plant. We already knew that by the time we were making the decision. And so it was a part of the calculation. I don't know many people, especially at today's market prices, that are planning on 100% prevent plant for their FSA farms for 2021. So maybe that's not going to be as big of an issue for us as normal. But I do want to point out that 2 and 3 really fit into this high year-to-year production variability. And where I see this most is if you're in flood-prone areas, so river bottom ground or just area that floods a lot, and all of that acreage is in the same FSA farm number. And you have, again, it's a high production variability where one year, you had perfect growing conditions and you had a booming crop, and the next year it flooded and you didn't get anything, right? That would be considered high to year production variability. So I think this makes sense. I think ARC IC makes sense for people in that situation, to where you could have a completely wiped out year and trigger the ARC IC payments. The second way is if you have farm yields that are highly variable compared to the county average. And that's really that second bullet point is, if you're on one side of the county and you have yields that never match the county average yields, and it's heavily weighted towards the people on the other side of the county, ARC IC is probably a little bit better of a fit for you, just from the standpoint that it's more closely related to your situation rather than a whole bunch of people on the other side of the county. And then the last situation is if you've got large acres of fruits and vegetable, and large is, or alfalfa would fit into this as well, but large is a relative term. I like to think I'm tall, but you put me next to an Ohio State basketball player and I'm relatively short. Large acreage of fruits and vegetable or alfalfa here would be anything that's greater than 15% of your total acres. So if you got more than 15% of your total acres in any non-covered crop, so basically not corn, soybeans, wheat, barley, grain, sorghum, anything else outside of the traditional row crops, ARC IC might be a program for you. So let me talk about these. So those are our 3 programs, and we'll talk into some of the election decisions here in a second. But I want to talk about the supplemental coverage option, because supplemental coverage option is only available if you enrolled in PLC. And supplemental coverage option was very unpopular from 2014 to 2018 because the majority of folks across the country were all enrolled in ARC County, predominantly for corn and soybeans. And so if you were enrolled in agricultural risk coverage county-based option, the supplemental coverage option was not available to folks. And I think the reason, or the perception, was that people weren't enrolling because the program wasn't good. The actual reason is the majority of folks weren't eligible. And so what we've seen is that as people switch to price loss coverage option and supplemental coverage has become available, we've seen participation rates start to increase. But it does pay, what it is SCO is an area-based crop insurance product for revenue or yields up to 86% coverage and it does contain higher subsidy levels. So it is a rather cheap policy, and I'll show that on the next slide. The downside of it is we used to say the area-based coverages didn't have much legs to them unless they were at 90% or above, meaning that it was about 90% is where it triggered. And if you think about it, county is averaging all the farms in the county together. And so it becomes hard to get that, that big variability to get a 14% drop. So the only way the area coverages really started to pay out is if you had widespread drought or widespread persistent rainfall. It does not provide a lot of the coverage if you have individual losses on your farm. We'll talk more about that. But here's what it looks like on principle. Again, the graph on the left is coverage levels for your individual policy, your underlying policy. So all the way from 50% coverage all the way up to 85% coverage. If you buy SCO, and again, these are based only on individual policies, multi-peril crop insurance policies, not area-based policies. But if you buy SCO, it fills the remaining gap up to 86%. Okay, so 36% SCO would be added to your 50% crop insurance policy if you had bought a 50% RP, revenue protection policy. You would get 1% SCO coverage if you already had an 85% RP policy. Okay, so it fills the remaining, it fills the remaining gap. So over here is just kind of the premium subsidies. And I'd like to note that we're still in the discovery period for crop insurance. We're going to have higher crop insurance premiums this year due to higher prices and higher implied volatility. And in some cases, you might see a doubling of your crop insurance bill in 2021. I haven't looked specifically at Ohio counties, but we've been looking at Missouri's counties, and we've seen policy or premiums double for a lot of folks in different situations. But the way this works is I've got a basic unit here in the first column. And again, this would be the premium you'd pay, or at least, in this 2019 example, it was $34 an acre for 85% revenue protection. It was $2 for 50% revenue protection. But SCO is an add-on policy. So if again, if you're buying 85% underlying coverage, there's that 85% premium, but it would only cost you about $1 to add that additional 1%. Versus, if you're at 65%, you're adding a bigger chunk of SCO, and so your SCO premium goes up. But the nice part about this policy is if you're looking at adding some revenue protection to your farm, so if you're a 65, 70, 75% crop insurance user, you can get some additional area-based coverage on your operation relatively cheap. Now, it is not appropriate to say that you have then 86% insurance coverage. No, you would have 65% individual coverage and then 21% revenue coverage for the county. And those two might work in tandem together. And so this is where it's important to know how your individual farm relates or responds to the county yields and revenue as well. So certainly a possibility. I hear a lot of people talking about SCO in terms of, just the buy up coverage. And certainly it is cheap to buy up. What I don't like hearing is when people talk about decreasing their crop insurance bill, so going from like 85% down to 75%, because again, you're going from $34 an acre down to about $20 an acre, $21 an acre. So it is cheapening your crop insurance bill, but that is not the same level of protection that you had. And I want to make that clear. Area-based protection is not the same as individual protection. And it certainly comes up in prevent plant guarantees. Your prevent plant guarantee is only paid out on your individual policy. So if you lower your individual policy to buy up area-based SCO coverage, your prevent plant guarantee is going to be that lower individual policy. It's not going to be the 86%. So just some risk to point out there. So the question I get is SCO right for my operation? I think a couple of things to think about and consider are if planted acres on your farm are far greater than historical base acres, meaning that you now plant a lot more corn and less wheat than you used to, but your historical base acres are still heavily wheat or grain sorghum. And I think SCO does provide a stronger revenue protection for what you're actually growing, right? So, the ARC and PLC programs are paid out on those historical base acres, and they're paid out on the crop that you have base acres of, unless it's ARC IC. But, so if you're looking for risk management of what you're actually growing, SCO provides that because it's a crop insurance product for that current year. I like to remind folks that crop insurance units might not match up with FSA farm numbers. Certainly if you're in enterprise units, a lot of times the enterprise units do not match up with FSA farm numbers, but just something to keep in mind. You are decreasing your individual coverage if you're cheapening your crop insurance bill if you're decreasing your coverage, but you're also lowering your prevent plant protection. I talked about that just a few seconds ago. However, I do not want to, diminish the thought of buying up crop insurance if you're at an 80% or an 85% policy holder. And again, at 85%, you would only pick up 1% of SCO, and at 80%, you'd pick up 6% of SCO. But that still does provide revenue protection. It does provide county-based revenue protection of about $7.42 at current corn prices, if you want to think about it in terms of that. I do believe, and I think we're finding, at least through case study analysis, that PLC with SCO is the most complete risk management option of the three. The three options being ARC County, just PLC, or PLC with SCO. The reason for this is because basically with PLC SCO, you're getting the best of both worlds. The SCO policy protects against ARC yield losses, whereas the PLC protects against low prices. It does cost a premium and administrative fees. And so you are paying a little bit more to have that best of both worlds. I do think there's some private insurance products that can do the same thing and offer higher levels of individual revenue. So at that point, those products are not based on county yields, and so more closely tied to you. And then we have this third thing now of enhanced coverage option, which is basically the same thing as SCO. It just goes higher. So it insures against a band of 86% to 96%. So again, you can add that onto your SCO if you want. And this is what ECO looks like here. It is an area trigger policy. And there's two options, 86 to 95 or 86 to 90. You can use it with supplemental coverage option. But the nice thing about ECO is you can use it with either choice. It's not fully restricted to PLC. You can do ARC County and do ECO. And so I've got an example down here of just kind of how all that stacks up if you do ECO, SCO, and your farm level policy. And I'm just doing the 90%. So this tier here, 86 to 90% in this example. But I do want to say that I do think you should think of these as two separate policies. Basically, these SCO and ECO policies as high coverage options versus, your farm level protection, because there is scenarios where, your farm revenue could come in above, that 80% benchmark, and your county revenue could come in at 95%, and neither policy would trigger, even though your individual farm policy came in at 82%. So therefore, it is not accurate to say that you have 90 or 95% coverage, because I think you should think of these as two separate policies that can trigger at different times and different scenarios. So this is my little joke. I put this in all three times we've done this. So if you've seen my slides, you've seen this before. But economists, weathermen, and pollsters are often wrong in the eyes of the public. The reason for that is we love and use the rule of probability, meaning that there is always a certain case that we're going to say on average, and the majority of the time this is going to happen. But we all know that is always wrong. Things changing the analysis. And so there's always a certain probability that some extreme event could happen and that changes the outcome. So I pull these from the University of Illinois. This is their price distribution tool. And it basically takes into account what's the probability that the prices next year fall below 370, or those reference prices. And for corn, that reference price is 370. So the chance of corn for 2021 falling below 370 is about 19%. There's an 81% chance that the price will be above 370. And so these haven't changed that much. If you've been following this, these are updated every day. And certainly they've, I think when we first started this maybe 2 months ago and I was doing these webinars, I think there was like maybe a 27% chance that the price was going to be below 370. And that chance has continued to fall as we've gotten closer to expiration and more things have become known. So the way I would look at this is like at a 19% chance of rain today, I probably wouldn't take my umbrella. It's possible, but it's unlikely is how I would say that. The same thing with soybeans, and this is the one that, we've got to get below 840, and looking at futures prices today, I don't think we're going to get there, but certainly there's possibilities where we do get there. Another trade spat, a great growing season here in the United States with 93 million acres, 94 million acres of soybeans, and a 54 bushel per acre national yield. Like that could get us probably pretty close to 840. But right now there's only a 3% chance of that happening. There's a 97% chance the price will be above 840. So again, we've got to fall below those reference prices, and the probability doesn't look like that for corn or soybeans. So here's my, I love to look at the decision this way, and for all crops, I think this is a great way to look at the decision. I'll explain to you my method here, but basically this is the first time, as I've mentioned, in a long time that we have not known as much information about these program elections as what we do this go around. So can we use history to tell us a little bit about program selection in the future? And the way we can do that is, can we look at prices from the previous marketing year, so the marketing year we're in right now, to influence next year's marketing year average prices and payments? And I think we were surprised at how strong these examples, Carl Zuloff and I put this together with the folks from Illinois. And I think we were really surprised at how clear or how definitive the answers actually were. So to give an example of what I'm actually talking about, here's the example for this year, right? The estimated corn price for a marketing year average for 2020 and 2021, reported by the World Ag Outlook and Supply and Demand Estimates, was $4.30 for this year. So that's the current marketing year we're in right now for program year 2020. We've still got a couple months in this marketing year to go. And the effective reference price for program year 2021 is $3.70 for corn. So again, that's that reference price I keep talking about. If we take $4.30 and divide it by $3.70, that gets us a corn soybean ratio of 116%, meaning that the price currently, or the previous marketing year, is 16% above our reference price. That soybean ratio, again, same method. This year's soybean price is expected to be 11.15. If we divide that by the 840 ratio, we get 132. So that's how these ratios are calculated. Keep those numbers in the back of your mind. If we take all of the previous years of Ark County corn and soybeans and we look at this ratio and compare the ratio to the payout of payments, we can start to make an idea of which program is going to trigger the most often and to which magnitude. Okay, and so I've got listed here the three key differences between the agriculture risk coverage program and price loss coverage program to basically inform this analysis. And you can see where these ratios fell in the different spectrum. Okay, so keep in mind we're looking at ratios from the previous slide. So basically, if we take all those ratios, and if the ratio was 80% or less, meaning it was 0.8 on the calculation, 100% of the time, PLC and Ark County triggered. Okay, so 100% of the time, when the ratio was 0.8 or less, the program triggered. When we had a ratio that was 110 or higher, or 110 to 130, Ark County triggered 90% of the time. PLC only triggered 15% of the time. So the way to look at this is Ark County triggers more frequently across all different scenarios, regardless of price, than PLC. The higher the price, the lower the chance PLC is going to pay, right? We've talked about this throughout this process that the volatility of yields and the sensitivity of yields makes Ark County trigger more often. However, the reverse is true. This is now looking at how much those payments are. So when that ratio is 80% or less, Ark County pays out $23 per acre, comparable to PLC's $81 an acre. So even though they're both triggering at 100%, PLC is triggering larger payments. So if that ratio is 80% or less, or 0.8 or less, both programs are going to pay out, but the PLC program is going to be larger. That's the way to look at this. Reversely, if we're up here in this 110 to 130%, Ark County is triggering more often and has the higher payment, right? So that's how we can use these ratios to inform our decision across crops. And I'm going to break these into three categories. This category here is where both programs are paying out roughly about the same percent. They're triggering at the same frequency, but PLC clearly has the advantage in terms of the dollar payout. This middle category here is a toss-up. Same way over here, right? Ark County is still triggering fairly free, 100% of the time, or at least in past history. But the dollar values are pretty similar. And then this final category out here is where PLC is not triggering very frequent at all and has small payments, right? So I'm going to give the advantage over here to Ark County. So we can use these three categories to then look at our crop decisions. So here's the ratio as they stand today. And again, in the examples I showed you earlier, corn was at 116, soybeans was 133%, wheat's down here at 91%. So in those three categories I showed you on the previous slide, any of the crops here in the purple bars give a edge or an advantage to Ark County. Anything in the yellow bars give edge towards PLC, given our historical analysis and what we know of prices today. These crops here in the middle, which include barley, are a toss-up, and there's no clear signal whether Ark County or PLC is favorable. And this is where a diversified strategy of putting some crops in PLC and some crops or some FSA farm numbers in Ark County might be a smart policy. So I just throw this out here as I like to look at the decision this way, and certainly I think it's it's favorable for at least making the decision simple when neither program is expected to trigger out much, if any at all. Okay, so election notes, and then I'll finish and wrap up, and I think we've got a couple of questions. Producers can amend their decisions up till March 15th. You do not have to amend if you do not want to, but you must go in, sign the paper, and enroll with the CCC 866. It is the active producers on March 15th of 2021, which is my second bullet point there under the first category. So therefore, if, for instance, you're a new farm or you're farming some land for the very first time, you need to get that information into the FSA office so they can make sure that your farm is logged properly, and you can change that decision if you want to. Where this is probably going to be the biggest impact is for those folks in Northwest Ohio. If the people before you had Ark IC and you're now renting some land, you might want to take that out of Ark IC, but you have to get that information into FSA as soon as possible. So it is whoever is on the farm and actively farming as of March 15, 2021. All producers with shared interest in the cropland must sign. However, a lot of people do have power attorney, and that does count. So if you have power attorney for others, you can sign for them. But as I mentioned, it's just politeness to at least consult with them or at least give them a heads up. And then again, you can email or call your local FSA office to set up an appointment. And again, if you've made any changes to your FSA farm, whether that's through purchased or sold ground, updated leased ground, changing those lease agreements, or you've changed your farming operation to either a partnership from a trust, or you've changed that partnership into LLC, you need to contact your FSA office immediately to make those changes so they can get that process started. So if you want, you can amend your election by March 15th. So my closing remarks real quick. Program election for 2021 will be different than 2014 and 2019 because we no longer have the benefit of knowing as much information about yields and prices as we did during those previous elections, right? We're 6 months away from the marketing year even starting. The crop's not even in the ground yet. So effectively, I think this decision comes down to your operational goals. Are you more concerned about yield risk or price risk? Certainly, university decision aids can help with probabilities to maximize the probability of payments. The way I like to look at this is wheat favors PLC again, soybeans favors Ark. And I also think corn favors Ark given the sensitivity of yields. I know you look at some of the university decision aids and they give the favor towards PLC. Part of the reason for that is the expectation or the price distribution around those PLC payments. And I'll show you an example here in just a second. But basically, the chance of getting to $2.50 corn is low, but it is in the calculation. And at $2.50, we'd be triggering massive PLC payments. And so, there is a biasness of university calculators towards PLC. But given the sensitivity of yields, Ark County does provide some protection. Farms that went into Ark IC in 2019 might want to amend their decision. However, I do think there are some situations where Ark IC makes some sense, especially if you're in highly variable yield areas, basically river bottom or flood prone areas where you've got that boom and bust yield scenarios from year to year. I think the chance of ARC and PLC payments is relatively low, but I do think, there are some possibilities to add some SEO coverage with PLC. You get the best of both worlds. It does provide some additional protection. You are paying a little bit more for it, or you're paying an extra program cost, but it is cheap because it's subsidized at a 65% level, meaning that the government's paying 65% of your crop insurance bill for SEO. But I do think, if your goal is to ensure that some of your risk is always protected, a diversified strategy might have appeal to you, meaning that you're putting some of your FSA farm numbers of corn into PLC and some of your FSA farm numbers into ARC County. I got a kick out of, I gave this presentation to a group of county extension educators in Missouri a couple of weeks ago. And one of the educators say, I don't want to be diversified, I want to be right. And I kind of chuckled because basically what he was saying is he did not, diversification usually gives up some payments, but you're always ensuring you're protected in some way. Whereas, he just wanted to know the right answer to get it in there. There are additional resources. And Mary's got these slides available that we can send out so you can get the links, because I've got the links all in here. But FSA has a nice website related to information about ARC and PLC, and you can find it there at that link. Ohio State has resources, frequently asked questions and videos as well, and you can find it at that link. K-State has information along with a nice fact sheet and then a payoff matrix under the different scenarios for different counties. And here's their link for that. Illinois certainly has their tool, and here's Illinois' link and tool for the different commodities. I do want to point out that you can click. So if you click over here if you use Illinois' tool and you click on this payment distributions tab over here on the right, it does pull up this probability here of the different payouts. And this is what I was talking about with those high PLC values, right? So out here, basically, they've got $150 of a PLC payment being figured into this. To trigger a $150 PLC payment, the marketing year average price for corn would have to be at $3. And that's a very low possibility right now, right? The probability of it being $3.70 was 19%. The probability of it being $3 is a lot lower. So just so you know that these always favor PLC a little bit due to these high payments out here in the distribution or the tail. For the folks that want to look at ARC-IC again, there is the tool that I helped build. It's located on the Illinois website, and you can put your farm information in and play around with different scenarios. The question I get a lot of times is if I have a small acreage that's in an FSA farm number. So let's say I rent one field from somebody and it's only 50 acres. I'm going to plant all 50 of that acres to corn. Can I put that into ARC-IC and get free revenue insurance? Because again, it's based on what you planted and it's based on a guarantee of revenue. The answer is yes. But I want to caution that and say the 65% base acre payments, remember you're only paid out on 65% of your base acres under ARC-IC, that effectively gives you revenue coverage at 56%. So you can do ARC-IC in that case and get free revenue coverage, but it's going to be basically just the catastrophic revenue coverage that you've got in the policy. And then Texas A&M has their decision tool and resources available as well at that link. So closing remarks, and again, we talked about these as we go, but I just wanted to put them back in here. I think the decision is relatively straightforward. I don't think you should stress on it too much. And I've just spent an hour probably going through some things that you already knew. And so I hope I gave you some things to think about. But that flow chart that I had at the very beginning, where I asked those 4 questions, is something that I would really encourage you to think through for your operation, because I think you can digest and analyze your farm in a relatively simple way by just answering those yes/no questions. And so, when you're thinking through strategy, the greatest risk management protection, regardless of commodity, will be PLC with SCO. Basically, that's the best of both worlds, but it is costing you a little bit for that SCO policy. The second best risk management strategy is different FSA farms in different programs. So if you've got 9 FSA farms, putting 5 of them in ARC County corn and 4 of them in PLC corn. The program most likely to trigger a payment is ARC County, but it might be small, especially at today's prices. The largest payment, but is very unlikely for corn and soybeans, is PLC. And so, it's going to take a pretty large drop in price, and especially since national price does not vary by much, it's going to take a pretty substantial drop in prices to trigger PLC payments. So the best message I have for farmers is plan on no payments and be pleasantly surprised if some come. Crop insurance continues to be our best source of risk management, and that's true again this year, because it's based on individual farms and it's based on current conditions. Whereas these ARC and PLC programs are based on historical payments, and certainly we're in a much better place now than we have been the last couple of years. So with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Mary. But thank you all for having me, and I look forward to the questions.
Thanks, Ben. There's a few questions coming in, but if you have any questions for Ben or for Matt, who's here from FSA, you can type them in the Q&A so that we can try and get to those. So Ben, first question, should I put my wheat base acres in PLC, soybean in ARC, and corn in ARC to potentially get a wheat payment on base acres in 2021?
Yeah, well, so at least that was my summary slide. Without giving a definite yes/no answer, I think I hinted at that pretty strongly. I guess the answer is to these is really my summary slide answers that question to a certain extent. Corn and soybean acres are going to probably see more protection due to the volatility of yields in our county. PLC would be favorable for wheat, just given the prices that we see for wheat and how strong the reference price for wheat is comparable to the market prices, or at least comparable to other commodities. The one thing I would throw up for wheat is we have seen some strong ARC County wheat payments. 2019 was an example, but certainly we saw strong ARC County wheat payments in previous years due to that variation in wheat yields. I just want to emphasize that wheat can see strong volatility in yields as well. A lot of it is due to the nature of the crop. We tend to treat wheat as a residual crop, meaning that if it doesn't look good in the spring, we till it up and plant it to corn and soybeans and so when we do that, we're taking our more marginal wheat out of the picture, and that tends to raise wheat yields because we've taken the marginal yields out of the picture. Versus, we've had years where we've grazed the wheat over the winter sometimes, and so that's hurt wheat yields. But then we've also kept the wheat yields in the picture, even if they look bad, and that brought those wheat yields down. My expectations for 2021, and I guess this is my long way of answering this question, I just have a hard time seeing a lot of those marginal wheat acres staying into wheat. I think if we get here in the next couple of weeks and we see that the wheat looks bad, it had winter freeze that killed it. It just doesn't look bad. Given the prices that we're seeing on corn and soybeans, my expectation is people are going to take those acres and turn them into corn and soybeans. So it's taking those marginal wheat acres out of the picture and raising the wheat yield, which then lowers the perk for ARC County. So yeah, I would give the incentive or the tilt towards PLC on wheat.
And I think that's something that people sometimes forget. A lot of producers that I talk to seem to forget is that even if you're not growing wheat, if you have wheat base acres, you can still get that payment. And so you do want to remember to care about wheat, even if you don't grow it, if you have the base acres. Okay, so although you lower the potential percent for prevent plant with lower coverage plus SCO and ECO, can you still buy up the additional 5% prevent plant optional coverage?
So you can. We're kind of talking about apples and oranges here a little bit. So I want to remind folks that prevent plant coverage is only available on the underlying individual policy. And then the way the prevent plant works is we take your individual percent. So let's say you have an individual policy at 80%. We're going to take that 80% times the corresponding crop prevent plant rate factor. And for corn, it's 55% For soybeans, it's 60%. And so that additional 5% actually is attached to the prevent plant factor. Okay, and I wish I had a slide for this because I think I'm probably going to confuse you more than what. But if you drop your individual coverage, so if you go from 80 to 75, you're losing 5% on your individual coverage. Then you're going to multiply that by your prevent plant factor, and that 5% buy-up is on the prevent plant factor. So if you lower 5% on your individual policy, you're not gaining 5% from your buy-up because it's being diluted in the process. And I thank you for the question. I'll put a slide in, and we'll certainly talk about it during our crop insurance webinar. But it's not yes, you can buy up the additional 5%, but it's not the same 5%, or it's not a full 5% if you had left your individual policy the same. And if you want to email me, I'll put my email in the box and I'll send you an example of what I mean by this. But yes, the answer is yes, you can buy up your 5% prevent plant coverage even with SEO.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And Matt, I know you're still on here, and Ben did mention this, but just to restate it, since it's been a question that FSA offices have been getting a lot, can you just touch on who is making the election?
Yes, thanks, Mary. And Ben alluded to this a little bit earlier in his slides, but whoever is on the farm for 2021 is the producers that are going to be making the election for the farm. So if you have new folks that are going onto the farm in 2021 and we need to do a reconstitution or a transfer or something of that nature on that specific farm, that has to be completed by March 15th in order for those folks to be able to make that election. If that's not done, it still can be done after March 15th. It's just when that's done, the new producers will not be making the election on the farm. It will default back to the election that was already made. That may or may not be an issue to the new producers, depending on how the program was enrolled or elected into for the previous years. But it could be a situation where, for example, and I think Ben alluded to this, in a farm where it was enrolled into ARC-IC for 19 and 20, and we don't want in that program for 2021, we're wanting into ARC-CO or PLC. If that election's not changed and it defaults back, then you would be stuck with that election from the previous year. So I know it's kind of tough at this time around. We're looking at March 15th. Some of those decisions aren't always made until later on, but if you have those, please make sure you get into the county offices or contact the county offices as soon as possible so that they can get that completed. And also with that, as soon as you can, if you've not made your enrollment, make sure we get an appointment and contact the county office as soon as possible so that they can service all those needs and get those applications completed for you as quickly as they can. But certainly, thank you to all of OSU Extension for your assistance in this endeavor. Again, it's been a huge help to team up with you all on these presentations. But yes, the biggest thing we can emphasize, if you have farm changes, get in contact with the county office immediately and make sure we get those enrollments in as quickly as possible as well.
Thanks, Matt. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So I just want to thank Ben for presenting today, and thank Matt for being a resource person for us. If you do have questions afterwards, you can follow up with any one of us.